Hello, welcome back to Mark's House and Garden, where today's job is moving three, not one, but three large tree ferns. Now these tree ferns have been in this courtyard for the winter time for storage, but it was always my intention to move them down near the wildlife pond where they will create a kind of Jurassic jungle feel. Because as you probably know, these tree ferns have got a really prehistoric look about them. I've got this great big tall one here, which is about 7 or 8 foot tall, which I'm going to use my wheels to move. There'll be a bit of a wrestling match. Then I've got one down here, which has got a lovely curve on it, and that one is going to be by a water feature, and it's going to reach out and curve out over the water. And there's one there behind the camera that you can't currently see, but I'll show you some footage of it, which has actually put roots down. So in this video, you will see the roots of that tree fern. They've already started producing lovely fresh fronds, all my tree ferns, and we've got 9 have survived the winter. During the video, you'll see me move the tree ferns. I'll also do a bit of a narration where I'll talk to you about what I think are the main care points of looking after tree ferns. But once you've got them and you get the hang of it, it isn't difficult, and they're really quite hardy plants, and they are amazing plants. So let's get on with moving them. I'll start with the big one behind me, then I'll move the curvy one, and then towards the end I'll start digging up the one that's rooted behind the camera. So let's get to work on moving these tree ferns, and let's talk about tree ferns. Dicksonia Antarctica, quite a hardy fern, it has to be said, and if you think about it, it's got to be hardy. These plants have been on Earth for thousands of years and managed to survive. And they've survived without our help. But we've brought them to the UK all the way from Tasmania in shipping containers. So we do have to give some thought and attention to how we look after them. Now they are quite chunky, some of these tree ferns, and quite heavy, so do be careful if you decide to move them. I understand that they grow in trunk size about a foot every decade, so this one that you can see me moving will probably be about 70 or 80 years old. And when you come to buy a tree fern, a couple of bits of advice. Number one, go to a reputable dealer. And I know from experience that Nobridge in Shropshire and the Palm Tree Company have both got very excellent reputations, and I speak from experience. They've served me very well. So there's 2 I would recommend, and I'll put their details in the description box below this video. But when you go to buy one, ask the garden centre for tips and advice, and just see how knowledgeable they are. Obviously check the plant's condition, but it might be that if it's early in the year that there's nothing really to check other than a great big log that's been sawn off at one end and has no fronds in the other. So possibly think about checking its weight. If it's very, very light, it might have been allowed to dehydrate in the shipping container. So I would ward against buying anything that's too light. Ideally, you should see some evidence of new fronds growing in the crown. They're like little tiny gorillas' knuckles. So buy your tree fern, and I think at the moment they're quite expensive, somewhere around £50 to £60 a foot. So quite a big investment. When you get it home, think about its native environment. These tree ferns come from underneath the jungle canopy on the forest floor, where it's damp and moist and cool and dark. So you are about to see me contradict my own advice, because I'm about to position these tree ferns in a situation which is not ideal for tree ferns, but I am going to take a calculated gamble, and I'm going to take extra precautions. And if what I do doesn't work out, I will move them again. And what I'm talking about really is that if you think about their native conditions, is they want to be in the shade or the dapple shade. They don't want to be exposed to direct sunlight. And you can see that I'm actually putting 2 of mine in a very exposed, very open, light place. So the fact of the matter is, I'm going to have to come out here on a very, very regular basis and drench these tree ferns. Tree ferns must never be allowed to dry out. Dehydration will kill a tree fern. So in the growing season, these are going to get watered to death. Literally, the hose pipe will be on these 2, possibly 3 times a day. You can't overwater a tree fern in its growing season. Conversely, in the winter time, they do need, in my opinion, special care and attention, because you don't want to lose them over a cold winter. And despite the fact that they are supposed to be very hardy, down to -10, and I know of people that have kept tree ferns for decades without ever protecting them. Given the expense of these plants nowadays, I think it's well worth giving a little bit of attention to protecting them. I've done a whole video on winter protection, which I'll link to at the end of this one. But in a nutshell, what I do is I put some oak leaves into the crown, and what that does is it allows moisture in, stops them from dehydrating, but it also stops them from getting too wet. And I stop watering them in the winter because I don't want them to be sodden wet and cold. And then I wrap the crown in some horticultural fleece and some loft insulation and some coffee bean sacks, and that just provides a little bit of insulation to the extreme variations that we sometimes get in the UK. Now, it might be that if you didn't do any protection at all, your tree fern will be absolutely fine, but given the expense, I do take precautions. Do they produce roots? Well, here is the evidence. This great big 7-footer has been in a plastic pot, and it's put out roots into the compost that was placed around the base of its trunk. And you'll see later, the third one that I moved today, which I placed on the ground only 6 months ago, has also got roots. So they do produce roots. What is the function of those roots? Well, at one stage I was under the impression that there was no connection between the base of this plant and the crown. The crown looked after itself and the base just was an anchor. But I've been informed that actually food and nutrients will pass up the trunk. So it's worth encouraging these roots. And so I will dig a shallow pit and I'll make sure that these roots have got contact with the ground. I will mound up some earth around the base and I'll keep the base moist. And I'll even put a little bit of pelleted chicken manure around the base. We'll come to feeding the crown in a moment. I just want to point out that because they're quite heavy and because they put out those great big fronds, those fronds will act as a sail in the wind. Now, they don't get a lot of heavy wind or strong winds underneath the jungle canopy where these plants come from. But where I'm putting mine, obviously it is going to be exposed to some wind. So I'm going to put a stake at the back in a discreet position where it can't be seen. And I'm going to tie it to that stake using some natural looking jute rope. Now that stake, I might be able to remove it in a couple of years when this is rooted properly. But for now, I just want the added security that this tree fern isn't going to blow over and become damaged, or even land on someone and hurt them. So, think about staking it. I'm going to have to do something very interesting with the bendy one by the pond, but that's for another video, I think. So you can see me here tying the rope on. Now, I spoke about feeding the base of the tree fern and watering the base. You should also water the whole trunk. Watering the trunk will keep the whole thing moist and keep the air around it humid. And keeping that soaked will help. But do water the crown. And the crown is where you will also feed the plant. And when it comes to feeding, what I do is I feed the crown with liquid seaweed on a weekly basis during the summer months when it's growing. And that liquid seaweed will be absorbed by the crown and it will help to keep those fronds lovely and healthy. But what you can also do is just drop a couple, and I mean no more than a couple. You don't want to put a handful in, just a couple or 3 chicken manure pellets into the crown. And I say only a couple because I've heard that strong food can burn plants, so that's why I'm only saying a couple. Just put a couple in the crown, and then the water will dissolve them and disintegrate them, and they will leach down and feed that crown. So that's feeding taken care of. So we've spoken about watering. Basically, in the summer you can't overwater it. In the winter, don't let it dry out, but don't let it be too wet. And we've spoken about feeding it. We've also spoken about winter care and buying it. Now, I just want to reiterate what I've said about positioning. You can see here, I've positioned these to sort of create a gateway, an entrance point to my new Jurassic jungle garden. This is not ideal because it's exposed and most of the day they will be in direct sunlight. So I will have to keep a watching brief on these tree ferns, and if they start to suffer, mark my words, I'll be out there to move them. Ideally, they should be in partial shade. They do photosynthesize, so they do want some light, but ideally they want to be in partial shade or dapple shade, like the ones I've got tucked away at the rear of my cottage. And this is the third one I'm about to move, and this is the one that I know has put roots down. And you'll see these roots. I'm using a grubbing hoe, that's called a grubbing hoe, just to dig away beneath. I'm going to undermine it and wobble it, but it has got some rooting matter there. Incidentally, you can buy that grubbing hoe and my long-handled Irish spade and my post hole digger in my Amazon shop, and I'll put links to those products in the description box below this video. Look at that root ball there after only 6 months. Quite healthy, and that really is just from having contact with the ground. Essentially what you can see there is where the trunk ended when I bought that tree fern. I did stake it, I did tie it to a stake, but I could have removed that stake and that tree fern would have been quite stable at this stage after only 6 months. So there we go. The third of the three is now going to get wobbled and manhandled and placed on top of a mound of earth. Quick summary. Keep them wet in the summer. Keep them damp but not wet in the winter. Protect them in the winter against the wide variations we have in temperature. Although, be pretty relaxed about it because they are quite hardy plants. When it comes to buying a tree fern, I think it's worth spending a little bit more to go to a reputable dealer, someone who's been doing it a long time, someone who can answer your questions, and also someone who will give you a guarantee on your tree ferns. And apart from that, just enjoy them. You know, these plants will outlive us if we look after them. And what's the point of having them if they're going to be a source of stress and worry? I'm a great believer in experimenting a little bit, which is why I'm trying these in the open air, but I'll keep an eye on them. Hope you've enjoyed that. If you've got anything to add about the care of tree ferns, if you've got a different opinion to me, feel free to add it in the description box, the comments box below this video, and therefore we're becoming a kind of a hive mind, a YouTube resource, and everyone else can read the comments. This has been a difficult day's work for me, I have to say. Moving 3 very heavy tree ferns single-handedly and getting one out of a pot, digging one out of the ground has not been easy, but it's been very rewarding, and at the end of the day I'll be able to wander around this garden and enjoy the fruits of my labour. In the near future I'm going to be creating 3 new ponds around my wildlife pond, and one of the tree ferns, which you've seen me move already, the bent curvy one, is going to be positioned so it leans out over the water. So that's going to be an interesting challenge for me. How do I brace it? How do I set it in position without it toppling into the water? It's a challenge that I will overcome somehow, but you'll have to tune in and subscribe and watch a video another day. I'll leave it there for now, and I shall just wander around my wildlife pond now and enjoy my achievement for the day, and I'll see you soon for some more Jurassic jungle tree fern adventures. Bye for now.